Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I want to talk about Itsuki Kawasumi, the bow hero from The Rising of the Shield Hero. Check out my video about Ren Amaki, the sword hero, if you haven't already. And coming next will of course be Motoyasu Kitamura, the spear hero. So please consider subscribing for that, and plenty more shield hero content to come throughout season 2. Now, as with my video about Ren, I won't be going into any spoilers from later in the series in this video. I will make a video with spoilers about what happens to the heroes in later arcs of the light novels sometime in the near future, but this one will be safe for anime-only fans who are avoiding any spoilers for Shield Hero Season 2 and beyond. But I will be talking about some stuff that was skipped or sped through in the anime when it comes to Itsuki's personality and his background. So, Itsuki is the bow hero, and where Motoyasu the spear hero seems to be the one who poses more of an obstacle to Naofumi in the early part of the story, it is easy for the audience and for Naofumi himself to think Itsuki is kind of similar to the sword hero Ren. He isn't cooperative with Naofumi, but he seems a lot more likely to listen to reason than Motoyasu, and on a couple of occasions he joins Ren in standing up for Naofumi. For instance, when Mine cheats and helps Motoyasu beat Naofumi in the duel to remove Raphtalia's slave crest. We see Ren and Itsuki together quite often, and that makes it easy to think of them as similarly minded characters. However, as we find out more about Itsuki's party and how he's been running things, it becomes clear that he's very different from Ren, and is probably the most toxic of the three other heroes. Where Motoyasu is the most frustrating to deal with because of his blind loyalty to the badly chosen women in his party, which means he won't listen or think logically about anything, causing him to believe things like Naofumi having a brainwashing shield, even though it makes no sense, and causing him to stick with Mine even after it's revealed that she framed Naofumi and tried to kill her sister. Motoyasu can at least be seen as having good intentions. Itsuki, however, has a warped sense of justice that makes him self-righteous, narcissistic, and also leads to him causing a lot of problems for the people of the world he's been summoned to. We see in Season 1 that Itsuki and his party tend to act anonymously, travelling around and getting involved in local disputes and even revolutions, with Itsuki thinking of himself as some kind of secret vigilante, bringing justice to the people. But he doesn't stick around to see the aftermath of the things he gets involved with, and as we see when Naofumi visits a place where people are starving because of the results of a revolution Itsuki had assisted with, Itsuki doesn't look deep enough to pick the right people to side with, or to decide whether he should really be getting involved at all. He doesn't think about the long term, or consider outcomes. He only sees black and white situations where his ideals around justice can be satisfied. The way Itsuki runs his party is also shown to be pretty toxic, as we see with the incident that leads to Rishia joining Naofumi's team at the end of Season 1. This was kind of downplayed in the anime, with Rishia's attempt to drown herself before being rescued by Philo being shown as more a darkly comedic moment of her being dramatic, rather than as her being as genuinely distraught about Itsuki and the rest of the party rejecting her as she's shown to be in the novels. But in both versions, the party did conspire to kick her out, which is hinted to be because she was the only one who was useful during the fight against Glass, and the rest of the party began to see her as a threat to their status in the group. Itsuki did go along with ejecting her from the party, even though she'd clearly been framed, because he felt she was too weak. While Rishia was at least ostensibly weak when she joined the party, Itsuki didn't really consider how to help her get stronger in a way that suited what she was good at. When she had her class upgrade, he had in fact forced her to choose a class that was very poorly suited to her, which if anything made it more difficult for her to become stronger. Itsuki's party also seems to run a bit like a cult, with everyone in it idolising Itsuki, but also having a hierarchical structure where Rishia, as the newest member, ended up being treated as basically the servant of the others. The highest ranking underling in that hierarchy is a guy called Mold, who Naofumi typically refers to as armour, because he wears fancy armour, and Naofumi tends to give characters unimaginative nicknames rather than learning their names. Mold will play a role later in the story, but for now we've already seen him get into a fight with Raphtalia while the four heroes were having a conference, as well as being the most antagonistic about the Rishia situation. So, what do we know about Itsuki's background that causes him to act in this way and like being around people like Mold? Well, there is a big revelation about the world Itsuki comes from, but that's something that comes up much later, rather than something that was skipped from the anime, so I won't be talking about it here. I'm just mentioning that for people who've read the novels, so you know why I'm not talking about it. But we do know some things about Itsuki's background at the point in the series the anime has reached that help piece together why he has this fixation on being a special masked hero of justice, and why he runs the team the way he does. Like Ren and Motoyasu, Itsuki had played a game that strongly resembled the world they've been isekai'd to. But while Ren played an SAO-style VR MMO, and Motoyasu had played a more normal-sounding MMO, the game Itsuki played is described only as a console game, leading Naofumi to think it was a single-player RPG rather than an MMO. In a single-player RPG, you don't have to think about the human aspects of things like how you'll level up your companions, or who you'll take or dismiss from your party. This is because your party is just a selection of NPCs that you can use to help you if you win them over, and who will typically always treat you as the leader and hero, regardless of their own abilities or their role in the story. Whatever type of character you've chosen to play as, you can shape your party around that, and focus on the things you want to do with no friction from them, because they're just tools to help you have the experience that you want from the game. Naturally, this leads to a different mindset about how to work with party members than in an MMO, where the people you'll fight with are real people with their own plans for their characters, and where you're not automatically the main character in every situation. Many people would be able to separate their experience playing, say, Skyrim from what they were expected to do when summoned to a fantasy world as a hero, but because the world so closely resembles the game Itsuki is used as a major form of escapism, which I'll come to in a minute, it is likely that he can't get out of the mindset that he's playing that game, rather than operating in a real world with real people that just happens to have the same locations, similar mechanics, and similar events. Like the other two heroes who'd played games that seemed identical to this world, Itsuki views what he knows from the game as a guide, and so will consider ways of working with characters that were successful in that game to be the correct approaches to use here. And if it's starting to sound like those gaming experiences the heroes other than Naofumi had actually put them at a serious disadvantage, then yes, that is actually the case. Naofumi turns out to be the only one whose knowledge of games is actually beneficial to him in this world, because he's never played a game that is exactly like the new world, so has no preconceptions about it. But he did manage a large guild in an MMORPG, and so he gained a lot of experience that can be applied to the situations he finds himself in. Ren, who operated as a solo player, Itsuki, who played single-player games, and Motoyasu, who probably enjoyed the social aspect more than the strategic one, didn't bring with them any leadership experience, only false assumptions about the world, and a sense that they were safer than they actually were, due to the familiarity of the setting. It also shouldn't be understated that Itsuki had a big attachment to that game. Itsuki was a 17-year-old high school student when he died in his version of Japan, and was summoned to the new world. All three of the heroes other than Naofumi died in their original worlds, though Itsuki was the only one who met his end thanks to Truck-kun. Itsuki was having a hard time in high school with bullying, and this is something that's elaborated on once we learn the spoiler about his world that I'm not going to mention. But playing his favourite console game was his main form of escape from that, and was where he got to play out his ideals about justice and righteousness in an escape from a world he felt was unfair. This explains a lot about how intense Itsuki can be about his ideas of justice after being isekai'd to what seems like the same world that he used to roleplay in. Still, this is something that we learn about Itsuki in an early bonus chapter of the light novels that is told from his perspective, and isn't something Naofumi knows about him until much later on. Naofumi at first thinks, based on Itsuki's appearance, that he's a sensitive type of character who he imagines being really into playing the piano. And then later, he thinks, based on his actions and justice fixation, that he's someone very entitled and self-righteous. What Itsuki actually is a mix of all of these things. And while he does start off the story as probably the worst of the heroes in terms of attitude and approach, he still has the potential there to become a good hero and a better person. And without spoiling anything, I will just say that over the course of the story, Itsuki does have some interesting development, and his role in the story is not as predictable as it might seem at the current time. But what do you guys think about Itsuki the bow hero? Let me know in the comments, though as this is a spoiler-free video, do make sure you put a spoiler warning and some blank space before discussing anything from later in the series in the comments section. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon and to everyone who helps me out by subscribing to my channel and watching my videos. Thanks for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.